All right, welcome everyone, and thank you for tuning in to today's Active Transportation Resource Center webinar, which is entitled Volunteer Recruitment and Engagement for Active Transportation Non-Infrastructure Programs. My name is Victoria Custodio, and I'm part of the team here at the Active Transportation Resource Center, and I'll be the webinar facilitator today. As our announcement for this webinar described, today's webinar will examine the role of volunteers in active transportation promotion and will highlight promising and as well as tried and true practices and resources to help you plan for and manage volunteer enhanced activities. Still on the introductory slide, sorry. Thanks. The Active Transportation Resource Center is offering this webinar as part of its monthly webinar teleconference series, which looks to feature speakers and topics of interest and benefit to active transportation awardees and others who are working towards increasing safe and active transportation in their communities. That's throughout California. This webinar has been organized in response to numerous requests for support and training on volunteer engagement and management, and also based on the understanding that getting more people to walk and bicycle for transportation purposes requires different partners and strategies. So engaging volunteers, whether they are parents or community members or students, to help with your mission and messaging and all of your related tasks can expand the reach and impact of your activities, leverage modest resources, and ultimately help to shift community attitudes and norms to be more supportive of safe walking and bicycling. So that's our shared goal. As a reminder to those who have not yet attended one of our webinars or teleconferences, please know that this webinar is being hosted by the Caltrans Active Transportation Resource Center, which is supported by the Caltrans Active Transportation Program. We also go by ATRC, and the ATRC provides resources utilizing a combination of subject matter experts from Caltrans, as well as the California Department of Public Health, which is where I'm based, which is where our non-infrastructure team is based, California State University, Sacramento, or Sac State, and various other non-infrastructure, safe routes to school, and infrastructure experts. We exist primarily to support the Caltrans Active Transportation Program to ensure its success and deliverability, but we also allow for anyone interested in getting started or maintaining their active transportation programs through other sources to join in our training series. Next slide, please. Okay. So we have a little bit of housekeeping before we get to the meat of our presentation. Some quick reminders. As shown on the slide, we are only using audio through the telephone, and so this is the call-in information if you somehow joined us through WebEx and haven't accessed to audio yet. And all of the phones for our participants right now are on mute, and that just minimizes the background distractions so that we can really hear our presenters clearly. If you are experiencing any difficulties with WebEx, please click on the contact support link in the calendar invitation of this webinar, and hopefully we can get you some support as needed. Next slide. Please note that the webinar will be recorded, and it will ultimately be posted to the Active Transportation Resource Center's new website, which is caatpresources.org. And then lastly, questions and comments are encouraged. We have a system in place, and the way that you can ask a question is through the dialogue or chat box. You may type in your question at any time, and we'll respond to the questions at the end of every presentation. We'll respond to one or two questions at the end of each presentation, and then we're going to have a longer question and answer period after all presentations have been completed. All right, next slide, please. Okay, and since this is a training, we have set a few learning objectives for all of you who are joining us today. By the end of this webinar, we hope that you'll be able to name one or two benefits of engaging volunteers to support local or regional active transportation or safe routes to school non-infrastructure efforts. We hope that you'll also be able to provide 2 or more examples of active transportation or safe routes to school non-infrastructure activities that can be enhanced or leveraged with volunteer support. And lastly, we would expect you to be able to describe at least one successful volunteer recruitment or volunteer engagement strategy that's discussed by the webinar presenters or shared by a webinar participant in the chat function. All right, and then on to the great stuff. We have 3 wonderful speakers lined up today. And I have just a little bit to say about each of them before we get started. Our first speaker is Hanna De Appel, who is a senior planning associate from Alta Planning and Design, where she leads the firm's National Safe Routes to School program and practice. She has over 10 years of planning for inclusive and equitable Safe Routes to School programs. Today, as part of this webinar, Hanna has been asked to provide an overview of the spectrum of Safe Routes to School-related volunteer engagement opportunities, drawing from lessons that she's learned from managing the San Francisco Bay Area's Metropolitan Transportation Commission's Regional Youth and School Program. This program is also known as MTC's Spare the Air Youth Initiative, which encompasses extensive programming and support for Bay Area's Safe Routes to School programs within MTC's 9-county region. Following Hanna's introductory presentation, we're going to hear from Rosaria Galias, who is the program coordinator for Latino Health Access's Safe Mobility Ambassadors Program, which is in the city of Santa Ana. This program draws strongly upon the use of community residents as volunteers to help expand the reach of Santa Ana's new Safe Mobility campaign. As part of this webinar, Rosaria will share details about volunteer recruitment and engagement strategies used in the Ambassadors Program and considerations for starting up volunteer-driven active transportation non-infrastructure program efforts. Finally, we'll have Patty Horsley, who is adjunct faculty of health education at California State University, Chico, where she teaches undergraduate public health courses which incorporate community-based projects and applied learning so that students can understand how to do public health in the real world. Patty also has served as a faculty fellow in Chico State's Office of Civic Engagement, where she has worked to decrease barriers to campus and community partnerships and to simultaneously increase the number of students learning in the community. And for this webinar specifically, Patty will speak to ways to effectively engage college students in community-based health promotion activities and provide examples of different active transportation projects that have benefited from the support of Chico student volunteers. And I just want to add that we're especially pleased to have Patty join us today, as many of you on the phone may recognize her as one of the founding team members of the Safe Routes to School Technical Assistance Resource Center, which was a precursor to the Active Transportation Resource Center. So, okay. And then before we launch into Hanna's presentation, we have 2 poll questions for all of our participants on the call. The first is, just to help us get a better sense of who's here, please select the best response to describe your current volunteer management practice. Either that you are actively engaging volunteers right now, or that you're not really doing it. And sorry, that's an either or, but it just pick the best response that describes you. And we'll try to get to that 100% participation mark, but we know some are shy. But go ahead, and it just helps our presenters know who is on the phone. And I'm seeing results. I'm going to give it about a couple more seconds. Yeah, so I'm seeing, can you move that bar just a little bit? Can you point to exactly the number that I'm supposed to be looking at for now? Okay, yeah. So is that a percentage? Can you, yeah. All right, thanks for your patience. Okay, so we have about 39 attendees on the phone right now, and I've got 15 who've responded to that they're currently using volunteers, and can't do quick math in my head clearly, but we have about 8 or so who are saying that they're not currently involved with volunteers. So hopefully that gives our presenters some indication of who's on the who's participating today. And then our next question. Okay. Anybody want to switch the screen to? Okay. Thanks. And then here's our second poll question. So can you please select the best response to describe your experience in managing a volunteer-enhanced Safe Routes to School active transportation non-infrastructure program? So, and your choices are very experienced, moderate level of experience, and little or no experience. So that's just a self-assessment, again, so that we can get a better sense of who's joining us today. All right, we're going to give about 10 seconds. Thank you to everyone who is taking the poll right now. All right. All right. This might be a modest group. We have just a couple of you describing yourselves as very experienced, and I'm happy to say our participation numbers have gone up a little bit since our last question. So about 2 of 41. Moderate level of experience, we have about 10 of 40, and then little or no experience, about 15, and a couple who are not responding, but that's okay. You can listen and participate as need be. We want you all to get the most out of this experience. All right, so on that note, I'm going to introduce again our first speaker, who is Hanna De Appel. Hanna, if you will unmute yourself and let us know that we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Perfect. Great. All right. Take it away, Hanna.
Okay. Thanks a lot. And thanks, everybody, for on the phone. So I'm Hanna De Appel with Alta Planning and Design, and today I wanted to present some of the findings and the best practices that we've learned, as Victoria said, in the San Francisco Bay Area Spray the Air Youth Technical Advisory Committee. The Spray the Air Youth program is sponsored by MTC, which is the San Francisco Bay Area's MPO. And it's a regional coordination of Safe Routes to School practitioners and other folks who work with youth and climate change and transportation issues who may not consider themselves Safe Routes to School folks, but are pretty adjacent to us. I believe that there is a number of folks who attend our technical advisory committee meetings on the phone, so this may be a little bit of a conversation we had in the last quarterly meeting where we really talked a lot about volunteers and our each program's experience around parent volunteers and soliciting volunteers, and discuss some of the lessons learned. So this is really sharing the experience of a lot of practitioners from around the San Francisco Bay Area. So next slide, please. So it can be really helpful to think about the spectrum of volunteerism. So the level of involvement on the slide is escalating from left to right, with event volunteers spending maybe a couple of hours manning a table or leading a walking school bus on a one-time kind of experience. The next one over is that a volunteer can take on coordinating an entire event or several events over the course of the school year, but may not have a established title or role as a Safe Routes to School person or as the lead volunteer for this. And then moving along, many successful Safe Routes to School programs also establish formal Safe Routes to School champions, where a volunteer has ideally like a PTA position or has a formal title, and they sign an agreement with a larger Safe Routes to School program in order to really work within the school to administer a series of activities and events and encouragement items. And then finally, many programs can also afford paid staff, site coordinators, which is kind of the ideal situation, and because they're able to work full-time, maybe with multiple schools, but they're really focused on being liaisons between the school and the greater Safe Routes to School program and the other providers or educators who may be providing services. Ideally, a Safe Routes to School program would include all of these types of volunteers, that you'd have a lot of event volunteers and then some organizers, maybe a single 1 or 2 school champions and paid site coordinators. And this can be really valuable for reducing fatigue in your volunteers, which is a huge problem, and for really making sure that Safe Routes to School or your program is really infused in every level of the school. And a couple things about volunteers. When I say volunteer, it can really be just about anyone. Parents, teachers, and administrators are classic examples of Safe Routes to School champions. But it could also be grandparents, community-based organizations, after-school providers, or high school green teams, for example. And no matter where you are on the spectrum or what kind of volunteers you're working with, it's really important to lay out the roles and expectations so everyone can share a common vision for how they're being engaged and what they're expected to be doing. And so the remainder of my slides are really giving some specific advice for the process of engaging volunteers at these different levels and recruiting them and training them and supporting them and building your program. So next slide, please. In terms of recruiting, finding the right people to help you run your program, making it fun is such an important part of it. And making it clear what their expectations are and what the benefits of why they're getting involved and what they're getting out of being involved, what their responsibilities are in terms of when they're supposed to be doing a meet and greet table, like is shown on this slide, or when they're supposed to be organizing an event, and also what resources they have available to them, so that what most of these volunteers probably don't have graphic design skills or the time to create banners and posters and things like that, and generally they're readily available through a variety of sources. So making sure you're connecting your volunteers with the resources that they need in order to do their job well and look good while doing it. And then also making sure that everyone knows how to get in touch with the program director, project or site coordinators, education staff, and anyone else, so that if they do have a question, they don't feel like they're spinning their wheels and they can quickly get an answer and the support that they need. Next slide, please. I mentioned already that, the wide variety of who volunteers can be, but in order to, when you're soliciting your volunteers, the classic, of course, you should be starting with the parent-teacher associations and organizations. But we, at our meeting with Spread Our Youth, we talked a lot about the fact about how this challenge, really, of finding good volunteers for your program when you don't have a PTA or PTO to be kind of working with. And so there are a variety of other ways of finding parents and other potential people. Certainly outreaching at back-to-school nights or tabling at community events can help find individual people. And then there's a variety of other groups that your parents at your school may or may not be involved in, which can be valuable for finding your volunteers. So advocacy coalitions, the English Learner Advisory Committees are a requirement of all schools, I believe, but also faith-based groups, and then also public health are kind of classic good opportunities. Next slide. And then once you find the people who are interested in volunteering on your program, it's really helpful to start with a specific task and a specific ask. You're not asking people to sign up immediately for a year's worth of volunteering when they don't know exactly what the program is or what the expectations are. So some of the things that in the Safe Routes to School world that we recommend starting with is having people distribute flyers, providing safety tips and suggested route to schools, leading a single walking school bus or bike train for a certain event day, or participating in a phone tree for last-minute event changes. And just being at that meet and greet table to thank walkers and bikers when they're coming into school on the day. And another important thing in terms of communication is, of course, to not assume that people are going to be able to use email or websites. So sometimes text messaging is the best way of reaching your folks. And, whatever support that you can offer to reduce the barriers to somebody signing up to help you volunteer. Next slide. And then once you have the people who are willing and interested, they're often not trained in terms of volunteer outreach or traffic safety or any of the things that they might need to be doing. So it can be really helpful to have formal training events where people can get together and learn a little bit more. This is a great opportunity to also talk more about the benefits of what they're getting out of the program and why they should be walking and biking with their kids. It's also a really good opportunity to build your community and encourage the parents to get to know each other. So making sure that you have, some quiet time or time for people to schmooze a little bit is really helpful in these kinds of trainings. And then also working with community-based groups or leaders, particularly if your school has a large population of minorities or community of color, working with the trusted representatives in the community can really build trust. And when possible, hire them on as staff. But if not, then certainly having them at the table and really building your program with them is really an important piece of that. Next slide. And then building the relationships, everything is about relationships, and people are volunteering, the parents are volunteering in part because they think it's fun, it's a fun thing to do. And I love this picture. This is actually some advice from Carrie Hervilla, who's the Transform, works on Alameda County Safe Routes to School program through the Transform implementers. And some of the things that she recommends is that to the extent that you're comfortable, really share information about your life and ask about theirs, taking the time to figure out what they want from their volunteer experience and strive to make that one, if not the biggest takeaways that they're experiencing, making it about them, checking in with them often, especially at the beginning, letting them know that you're there for them, and face-to-face meetings are often best, making sure that you're building that relationship. Next slide. And when you're rewarding them, it can be really valuable to provide specifics to show that you're paying attention. This is again from Alameda County Safe Routes to Schools. They made a postcard using a picture of one of the events, Cocoa for Carpools, and with a little thank you note, and they sent it to all the parent volunteers. And this is a huge opportunity. It's not the most beautiful graphic postcard ever, but it's real and it's meaningful, and it shows that people are paying attention, and it shows the value of the volunteers themselves. Other things like certificates of appreciation, or if you have a program newsletter where you can recognize people, or lunches. People always love food. But bottom line, finding time to remind your volunteers how valuable they are to your program, how important they are to actually being able to do the things that you're trying to do. The next slide. And then the sustainability, of course, working with school-based volunteers, it can be really, really hard dealing with transitions. Students age out of schools, families move away, and the school administration can turn over. And so what in one year might be a really successful school might in the next year really not be involved at all, just because a key person is no longer there. So keeping it moving from year to year is really important to remind people that they're part of something bigger via meetings and informing them about the bigger picture of what the accomplishments of the program, the mode split, the mode shift, how many students have been reached, the safety, all of those kinds of data points about the benefits of the program, and really how making the connection for them about how their input has had this impact on the program. And then also really trying to find people to find their successors at the end of the school year. If they know that they're moving on, it is really helpful. They're the ones who know who their volunteers are. And so your existing volunteers are in the best position to find a new person to be doing it in the future. And that's when some of these name title of the PTA Safe Routes to School position, or having a signed agreement that can kind of help pass the torch to the next person. But really celebrating the volunteers, making it fun, and it should be make it a lot easier for you to get more volunteers to distribute the work, and then to have them continue from year to year. So next slide. So through Spread the Air Youth, we developed a guidebook with a lot of the tips that I just talked about, and then getting into some more detail on some of them. It's available on our website, and there's also a lot of other great implementation resources on our website, which is www.spreadtheairyouth.org. So I encourage you to check it out. And with that, I think I can take a couple of questions now. Is that the the approved process?
That is the approved process, and well, thank you first, Anna. That was an excellent presentation. Really appreciated that overview, and we do have a few follow-up questions. The first is just, I think, clarifying the spectrum of opportunity that you shared earlier, which is, so it was specific. It was, where do folks who volunteer on a regular basis fit? So somebody who volunteers every Wednesday, how would you classify that type of volunteer?
That's a good question. I mean, I think I would put them as an event volunteer at the very beginning, because as much as it is really valuable for them to come and attend and to be present and help out every week, I think that there is sort of a distinction between people who come and do a specific, like, hour-long task to help out versus people who are actually doing the coordination of an event.
Right. Good. Yeah. So this, I think that model is a great starting point for all of us to have these discussions. And but yeah, I think that's great. There's a lot of fluidity between those opportunities.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then the second question, I think we have time for before we move on, is do you have any experience with recruiting from retirees, or I think it was aging folks, outreach to aging folks?
Nice. Yeah, there are a couple of programs in particular who have really taken a focus on intergenerational safe routes to schools. Is kind of the catchphrase that they use. I want to say La Mesa in San Diego area has a specific intergenerational one, and I'm actually based in Portland, Oregon, despite doing a lot of work in California. And here we have our AARP representative is very into livability and is recognizing the value for elderly folks in getting out every day, in walking and in being active. And so they are starting to see this as a really great resource that benefits that community. And so they're doing some pilot programs here in the Portland area to bring more just elderly community members, not even focused on grandparents, but for corner captains and for walking school buses in particular.
Great, that's great. And we might need to follow up with you, Hanna, about that if we have some more questions about examples of those pilot cities, even though they're outside of California. I think we can definitely benefit. All right, just to keep us going, I want to thank Hanna for a wonderful presentation, and we want to move on to our next speaker, who is Rosario Galias. Rosario, are you ready to do your presentation on your wonderful program?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to turn it right over to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to be part of the webinar. For my presentation, first, I want to talk briefly about my organization, Latino Health Access, our mission, and our promotora or community health worker model. Also, I want to give you some data about Santa Ana and pedestrian bicyclists and cyclists, pedestrian bicyclist statistics. And just to give you an idea of why we're doing this work or why it's important to do community engagement and recruitment in active transportation and complete streets projects or campaigns. And after that, I'm going to talk about our Safe and Active Transportation campaign, in which we are working with community members that we call Safe Mobility Ambassadors, and how we recruit, engage, and train them for this campaign. And finally, I will mention some challenges and lessons learned from this campaign. All right, so next. So Latino Health Access, it's a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We were established in 1993. Our mission is to partner with communities to bring equity and sustainable change through education, services, and consciousness raising and civic participation. Our two mission priorities are, one, address urgent health concerns. How we do it is delivering culturally appropriate healthy related services and programs. And The number 2, engage individuals that live in low-income, low-opportunity areas. We provide them tools, training, and other mechanisms for civic participation, with our ultimate goal that we want them to transform the environment where they live and create a positive environment, and not only in their neighborhood but also at their house and home. Community engagement is our core work at LHA, at Latino Health Access. We believe that if we want to create a healthier and equitable community, the residents or the people that live in this community, they have to be involved, and they need to be included in every decision and every step of the process. And LHA's motto is participation makes the difference. So next slide. So promotora or community health worker. So a promotora, it's a member of this community, and we know that they are the experts, and it's someone that is an expert in her life and also the needs of her community. So we not only have adults, but we have kids promotores, we have youth promotores, we have seniors promotores. And how we started with this model since the beginning. So LHA's agency founder and CEO, America Bracho, started with this model a long time ago in Venezuela, when she was a medical doctor working in rural areas. So she brought this model from her previous work. So it's a peer-to-peer model. Participants that demonstrate leadership are recruited and trained to teach others to develop similar skills. And in-house we have paid community health workers or promotores, and they're the ones that work in the community where they live. So that's pretty much a little bit of what the promotora or a promotora model is. Next slide. And to talk about Santa Ana, just to give you an idea who we are, the population is a little over 34,000. Household income median of 5,200, but we know that in some areas or zip codes, there's the income is even lower than 24,000. And some of the participants or people that we have in our program or services is even less than 24,000. So just to give you an idea. The presence or percentage of poverty in Santa Ana is 22.1. 27.5% of people that live in Santa Ana don't have health insurance. The cost of rent is high, and the median household value is over $360,000. And to compare how much money we made, males versus females. So male median income is almost $23,000 versus female almost $18,000. Yeah. Next one. I got this map and statistics from the Safe Mobility Santa Ana plan. So the city is working to increase safe mobility in all areas of the city, achieve zero fatal bicycle pedestrian collisions, and reduce vehicle speeds and minimize collision patterns. So Safe Mobility Santa Ana plan is guiding a lot of this campaign, so we are gathering a lot of data from this plan or report. So nearly 55% of the Santa Ana residents do not have access to a personal vehicle. So that means that a lot of our people depend on active transportation. So they walk, they bike to their destinations, or they use public transportation. What you see in this map, the bigger the circle, the higher the amount of collisions. The yellow color is pedestrians, and the blue one is bicycle collisions. So In areas with higher concentration of youth, Latinos in poverty and low education is where you see that there's a lot of also lack of multimodal transportation systems. So we have here in Santa Ana a lot of people that depend on active transportation, or they walk to their destinations or bike to their destinations, but also in their areas, it's where we need the infrastructure the most. So next slide. Same, the data from the Safe Mobility Santa Ana. So a year, we have around 150 pedestrians collisions and 175 bicyclist collisions per year. Next one. Just to give you the final data about Santa Ana. Santa Ana, in California, among the cities with a population over 250,000, ranks number 2 in total collisions resulting in fatality and injuries. Number 3 in collisions involving bicyclists. Number 1 in pedestrians under the age of 15 involved in collisions or fatalities. And number 1 in collisions where alcohol was involved. And I'm saying the collisions and because accidents, we always avoid using accidents word when we know that we can prevent these things to happen. So we call them collisions or crashes instead of accidents. So next one. So because of that and all this, that was kind of the why we decided to do this. The city is doing a great work in changing the infrastructure. We have more bike lanes, and they're applying for grants to change the infrastructure of in some areas and some streets in the city. But we also noticed that education was missing, and we partnered with State Farm. State Farm gave us a little grant to create a resident-led educational campaign with the goal to improve multimodal safety through changing social norms or behaviors of multimodal users. Like I mentioned before, we have a lot of people that is already biking and walking in Santa Ana, but sometimes they don't have the information to do it in a safe way. So this campaign, the Safe and Active Transportation campaign, is an educational campaign to address that. So next one. What we're gonna do or what we wanna accomplish in 1 year, it's to train at least 10 safe mobility ambassadors in rules of the road, and they will help us in the educational campaign. The second one, we want to pilot a safe mobility outreach campaign with the safe mobility ambassadors and in a specific area, and we want to reach out to 2,000 multimodal users. So based on the data from the Safe Mobility Santa Ana plan, we selected a specific area. Since we don't have the capacity to do it citywide, we decided to focus our efforts and education in this specific area and evaluate how this effective this campaign it is or will be, and based on that, applying for more resources or funding to keep doing it throughout the city. So the other objective is to conduct a safe mobility observation in this specific area. So we're gonna observe how the multimodal behaviors. And based on what we observe, we wanna incorporate this and to address this in our educational campaign. The Safe Mobility Ambassadors will help us with that as well. And we want to educate at least 500 people that transit that specific area on safe mobility behaviors and rules of the road. Next one. So we said that we are using this strategy called Safe Mobility Ambassadors. So Safe Mobility Ambassadors are residents from Santa Ana, a lot of them from that selected area. And we have youth, and we have adults, and we have seniors. We have been doing trainings and outreach, presentations. The recruitment process, it's over. Now we are about to start the observations to finalize details for the educational campaign. So the Safe Mobility Ambassadors will observe with us, and they will help us with the campaign, the rest of the campaign. So like I mentioned before, we want to have the experts on the table, and since they live and transit the Santa Ana, so we will be more effective. Next one. Activities, we have to do trainings, and we're going to train this mobility ambassadors on how to analyze data, how to do door-to-door outreach, how to do presentations, and also how to do the observations or the audits. We're gonna do direct outreach and education via door-to-door. We're gonna go to schools and to other places where people gather in this specific neighborhood. Also, we're going to do the educational campaign, like I mentioned before, using popular education methods. We will do road safety audits with the trained ambassadors. And at the end, the idea is to have a short-term project to make this sustainable. So next one. Just to give you extra information, our outcomes, we want 1.80% of the participants to increase awareness about the rules of the road, and also 2.80% of the participants to demonstrate intention to at least implement one safe mobility behavior that they learned throughout this program. Next one. So how we recruit, train, and engage for this program. So for this campaign and for others at Latino Health Access, we use popular education methods to recruit and also to train community members. So these methods include like highly visual experiences like theater, songs, games, and other activities. The idea is to have methods that make easy for participants to retain information. For internal outreach, since we also provide services and we have groups and different activities throughout the year, we have around 4,000 participants a year, and we invite them. So we keep internal communication of the different campaigns and activities that we do. And for this one, we have been talking to other promotores that run or lead the activities or classes here. And they're the ones, kind of the bridge of communication with their participants to invite them on or engage them in our campaign. So it's super successful because promotores, they have already developed a relationship and trust with participants. So it's easier, the invitation, and for them to engage in this campaign, especially because a lot of them, they walk or use public transportation to come to our services. So that's our internal outreach. We have creative outreach in neighborhoods with high incidence. For this campaign, we want to incorporate role plays and using information about rules of the road, bike rodeos, bike rides, also videos. And the idea is to incorporate a lot of cultural knowledge and wisdom from the ambassadors to develop these creative outreach. And as part of the outreach, we ensure that we go to places where people, it's already gathered, like I mentioned before. So in this area, they feel like more like they feel safe, and it's easier for us to interact with them, and it's in a more natural way. So we are always where the people is. So we are going to go to schools, like I mentioned before, and apartment complexes in the area, the bike trail that is in that selected area. We're going to do door-to-door in that area as well, using like creative and a lot of visuals and catchy messages. The other thing that we use here as a strategy is addressing barriers to community participation. So we always provide simultaneous translation into Spanish mainly for our monolingual Spanish-speaking residents. We also provide snacks for individuals. The youth are always hungry, so we always need to have food. And another thing that we do is we provide childcare. So while the ambassadors, the adults are learning or getting trained, we provide also childcare. We adapt and we hold our activities at different times and different days. That include sometimes weekends or after hours. So that's part of kind of addressing if we want them to participate, we have to keep in mind that they have priorities and immediate needs. So especially with our community, we cannot forget that they have a lot of barriers and sometimes a lot of problems that they need to solve. So just to make their life a little bit easier, and if we want them to participate, sometimes we cannot forget when we invite them, for example, to come to a city council meeting or come to this bike rodeo, and we want you to be safe mobility ambassador. So we always need to keep in mind that we also need to ask them what other needs do you have, what is on your way to participate. So we work with them to address that. If we don't have the services that they need or resources that they need in-house, we'll refer them to other services. We have another strategy, which is neighborhood activation, and we do hope and energy projects. So for this aspect, for the last 3 years, we have been working in specific neighborhoods in Central Santa Ana. So we have promotores, paid promotores, doing activities weekly there. So it's easier for us. It's part of our also internal outreach in a way. So since the promotor, it's already there, and they provide training to local residents, it's easier for us to reach out to them. They're in another level of readiness, these participants in the neighborhoods. And so when the promotor invited them for this campaign, they were ready to step in and jump into this project. Active transportation knowledge and expertise. So we are not new in the active transportation or complete streets work. Since 1996, LH has been working with community residents to identify and improve pedestrian safety in Santa Ana neighborhoods. And we have been working in collaboration with the school district, with Santa Ana Police Department, with the healthcare agency. We have been in Walk to School Day initiative. We have done previously audits, walkability audits, and residents document all the safety or hazards in these specific areas. So for the last, I would say since 2009, we have been also working in bicyclist or cyclist infrastructure or projects. So at the beginning, our work was mainly to promote walkability, and now it's both walkability and bikeability. So we collaborate with a lot of groups We are part of Santa Ana Active Streets Coalition ourselves, and we work a lot with the city as well, with OCTA, and with the healthcare agency. Latino Taxes had a super successful project called the Wellness Corridor, and for this project we collaborate with the residents and multi-sectors. We have businesses on the table, and the idea was to have, since we don't have a lot of open spaces, let's try to change the infrastructure that is already in place to make it more walkable and bikeable. So downtown now has more amenities and is more walkable and bikeable friendly. So thanks to a lot of the work that we did with the Wellness Corridor initiative. Also, communications is super important. We know that just posting something on the media probably will we will target the youth or the younger ones, but not necessarily the adults from Santa Ana. So we have to use like different modes of communication. So for adults, we know that in person is the most effective one. That's why we do a lot of door-to-door, and we go where they are. And for the youth, we use a lot of social media to recruit them, and we also offer volunteer opportunities or community service hours for the high school students. And we have, with the youth, weekly meetings here in an organization. And right now we have 10 youth safe mobility ambassadors trained, ready to help us to teach other youth about rules of the road. And we have also around 8 adults that have been trained on rules of the road, and they're also ready to help us with the observations and the education campaign. Like I mentioned before, partnership is a lot part. So if you want to have a greater impact or bigger impact, you need to work in collaborations and know people that is working in these similar issues and partner with them and learn from them as well. So that's part of what we do. Next one. Next slide. Just to finish my presentation, I want to talk about some challenges and lessons learned. Budget, since we're a nonprofit, so we have staff that is in multiple projects. And sometimes, since we're working with residents, and like I mentioned, they have a lot of needs, so we have last-minute cancellations. So you plan something sometimes, and at the end, you have to reschedule or adapt to the situation because you don't have the amount of attendees that you expected. So also, we learned that we have less turnout during vacation time. So we have to wait to do the observations because kids and youth were on vacation. Transportation, it's another issue. So if we invite residents from Santa Ana to come to a training or to participate in something, we learned that we have to provide transportation or at least give them bus passes for them in order to get to the places where we're gonna have the trainings if we cannot do it where they are. So extra time to train members of the community and to change behaviors. So if you want to create like a sustainable change, you have to put a lot of time in residents from Santa Ana, because with people that have like previous training or skills, academic skills in a way, they're like kind of easier to receive a lot of information or training. But with our community, we noticed that you have to put double of the time that probably you estimated at the beginning of our project. And what we learned that evenings and Saturdays mornings are the best time for trainings and meetings and activities. We always have to be where they are, so have activities and trainings close to where they live. And like I mentioned before, provide transportation, translation, snacks, and childcare. And we learned that if you have someone from this community talking to train, and this person talks to someone else from this community, the impact that it will have will be greater, because you have a mom from this community talking to another mom, you have a youth from this community talking to another youth, and that has a lot of power and impact. And also we have to learn that we have to be patient, like change behaviors and infrastructure takes time. So next one. Well, thank you so much for listening. I don't know if we have time for questions.
Thank you so much, Rosario. That was really informative. I actually think that due to time, we went over a little bit with your presentation. We're going to move on, but we'll save like I said, the questions that are coming in, because I feel like they might be relevant for our last speaker as well. But I wanted to thank Rosario for sharing the model of engagement that they're using down in Santa Ana to ensure that there's more, the message is being spread. But at this point, I'd like to shift gears and invite our last speaker to unmute herself. Patty, are you there? Can't hear you here.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. All right. Great, Patty. And I have you going till about, we'll get through your presentation, and then we'll do all of the question and answers afterwards.
And then we'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. So as Victoria mentioned, I'm going to talk about how to, some examples for how we've engaged college students in active transportation programs. So yeah, I'm really excited. Go ahead to the next slide. So college students are really awesome partners in this work, and I think we often overlook that we have this huge source of volunteers in many of our communities. They are very eager for information on what they can do in their future, and I think engaging them in active transportation programming is a really great way to help them learn about this work and about active transportation in general. They're also very eager to get out of the classroom and into the real world with their academic careers. So often they just sit there and listen to lectures, and they want to be in the community learning how the work really happens. We also often find that they have skills that people want. For example, if they are bilingual, that may be a benefit to your program. And they're also often no or low cost to a project, depending on how they're engaged in it. And the other thing I want to mention that I didn't say here is when you work with college students who are based at a university or a community college in your town, they are residents of that community. That they frequently are bike riders and pedestrians getting to and from campus, and are really aware of some of the barriers that they face and the dangers they face on the road. So go ahead to the next slide. Just kind of starting with some foundation, when we think about engaging college students in community-based work, it's really important to understand and connect with the university's academic mission. As faculty, we have specific things we're trying to accomplish. One of those, I'll just go through the list, we want to increase their understanding of the course content. So I can talk to my public health students about how we encourage active transportation and how we look at infrastructure environments to promote safety. So I can talk to them about that in class, or I can put them in the community and experience that firsthand through some of your programs. So these programs can provide meaningful applied learning experiences where, again, it really takes that content out into the community and helps them connect their coursework with what the real world is really about. We're also very interested in creating civic-minded graduates, and that basically means that students who are interested in working in their community and working to really do things for the betterment of the world when they graduate. Next slide. So I think it's important to think creatively about how college students can support ATP projects depending on the situation, and I'll go into some examples of different ways students can be engaged. But they can be pretty independent and function similar to like entry-level employees in a lot of cases. Some ways that we can engage college students are staffing encouragement events like Walk and Bike to School Days, and I'll give you some specific examples of that. Delivering classroom and community education. In my experience, my students love going into classrooms and teaching kids, and the kids respond really well to them. And I also love the model of, bringing the university into these schools, and the teachers are usually really, really receptive to it. Conducting observational studies of walking and bicycling behaviors, conducting walk audits, conducting and analyzing community surveys, developing education, encouragement, and media materials or branding and campaign materials. So you could work with graphic design and communications departments to do some of that work. Advocacy to city council or other places. Again, I mentioned these students also live in these communities and can be a valuable voice when you're doing advocacy, or solicit donations. Go ahead, next slide. So I wanted to give one quick example of how I've engaged some of my college students in an ATP project, and this was with the town of Paradise. As faculty, I presented on active transportation and health at a community forum, so I provided some health data there and also a letter of support for the grant application that included some of that data. I've analyzed data from parent surveys and observational studies that our students have conducted, connected the town with the university-based nonprofit, the Center for Healthy Communities, to do their non-infrastructure work, and I'll talk about them more on the next slide. And we also provide student support for walk and bike to school events via our classes, both with Paradise and other communities around our county. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we connected the town of Paradise with the Center for Healthy Communities, and some of you may be aware of them. They do a lot of great work here in our Northern California region. They are a university-affiliated nonprofit and provide the lead for the non-infrastructure work for the project. And they actually have undergraduate student interns that are based at their organization. They have undergraduate student volunteers based there, and also have graduate students that staff the project. And they are the ones that go out and go into the classroom and do the education and help with the bike rodeos. They do outreach at back-to-school events and things like that, and they've been conducting observational studies, designing some data collection materials. So just really have been doing a lot of the great work that is going on in that project. And also providing student support for walk and bike to school, and just having those bodies there to help on the day of the event. Next slide. Okay, so just transition slide. How do we get started working with universities and community colleges? I know we're kind of giant bureaucratic holes and you don't know where to go and how do I get started? So I want to talk a little bit about that. Next slide. And I want to start by just kind of defining a few things. Some of these terms are probably very familiar to you. The first one is internships, and those are where students will spend a full semester or a full year working with your project. They're usually unit-based, so like in my department, students get, it's a class that they take and they get units for it, and it's an applied learning experience as part of their coursework. So the good thing about internships is students will spend a lot more time with you. So this is where if you want someone who's almost like an entry-level, like staff capability, that's what this would be in general. They require more supervision and training and commitment, but they're longer term and can be more engaged with the project since they're there more. Another term that's good to know is service learning, and that is basically applied learning that's connected to a specific course. And it usually engages all of the students in a course, either all at one time or spread out. So when I do a lot of service learning in my classes, and I have events where I take 30 students and they staff one big event. Or we take, 8 to 10 and we have them at every Walk to School Day in October, for example. And you work directly with a faculty member who's present for the activity. So you don't have to organize a bunch of students or a bunch of volunteers. You work with the faculty member, they coordinate their own students, and then they show up and they help, support you. So service learning, really great for one-time events or like weekly walk to school type of stuff. And then you also have volunteer or service clubs or campus service organizations that can have a big pool of volunteers for you, either one time or over a semester as well. And the other thing I didn't mention on here, so I'll get to that later on. Okay, sorry, next slide. So as you think about how to engage with academia and try to engage more college students in your work, I want to encourage you to think about both universities and community colleges, depending on what's in your community. Keeping in mind that these are large institutions, generally I wanted to give you ideas on where you could start when you approach your local academic institution. So I've had some search terms that I put here for you. So if you go to the university website and, where do I start? These are some search terms you can put in their search engine. So community engagement, civic engagement, service learning, internships or volunteers, and kind of see what you get. As an example, for those of you with a CSU near you, I wanted to show you that the CSU really, there's something called community partnership coordinators that are really all over the state. So if you could click on that link there for me. I want to show you a list. Oh, hopefully it works.
Yeah, it's just a little bit slower, but it's circling. Okay.
So this might be the only one we show then. So just to give you an example, this is from the CSU system. And you can see that all of these colleges around the state have these community partnership or community engagement coordinators. So if you have a CSU near you and you're interested in working with them, this could be a starting point for you. That's kind of all I wanted to show, Victoria. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. Hannah mentioned earlier, talking about like communicating the benefits. Why are we here? What can we give to these volunteers in addition to what can they give to us? So before you approach the school, I think it's important to think about these types of questions. Why do we want to work with college students? So what experiences can we provide to them that will enhance their learning and growth? So remember, we're trying as faculty to accomplish an academic mission, and so we need to address that when we work together. How can students enhance your current work? Can they take on new projects? How can they help us accomplish our goals? So what value added do they really bring to our work? And what specific needs do we have that students can fulfill? So a lot of times you'll be approaching faculty or departments and they won't know anything about your work. So the more specific you can be in saying, well, this is what our program is, and these 5 things are ideas for how your college students could get engaged, that will be helpful to the faculty member who may be unfamiliar with your work. And also think about, do you want students for one-time events, like a big group, or do you want 1 to 2 for more in-depth project support over the year, which would be more like an internship? So those are questions it would be good to think through before you approach them, and then you can start thinking about what university departments might be a good fit. And I'll give you some examples of those on the next slide. Yes, so next slide. So you have kind of some search terms, you know a little bit about what you want, what do you do next, and where do you go? What we find often is that people send an email to someone and then that person never responds and then everyone just ends up frustrated. We don't want that to happen. So, of course, if you know an organization or another nonprofit or your health department or something has student interns or volunteers that they work with, start there. Say, who do you know at the university, and use that as an entry point. Again, searching the website with those terms, civic engagement, community engagement, is a good way to start. And also thinking about what specific departments does the university or community college have that might be a good fit, and looking directly at those and reaching out specifically to those. So some that have that may be good fits for this. Public health is always a good one. Here, everything's called differently depending on what university you're at. Here we have geography and planning, which does a lot of work with the walk audits and urban planning issues. Transportation or engineering departments, specifically they have a traffic engineering type focus. Social work, sociology is a good one. Public relations or communications, there's a lot of community work generally, journalism along with that. There might be a leadership program. Here we have one through our associated students, and I know our community college's leadership program does a lot of service work. Political science, if you're doing advocacy work, for example. So you can kind of look at what departments do they have at the university that might fit with what we're trying to do. And then one thing to start with is you can start calling or emailing department chairs and saying, what do you think? This is kind of what we have in mind. In general, they'll forward it to a faculty member that might be appropriate. If you have time, you know, say they have a public health school and you want to go there, if you have time to look at the faculty and see if there's a specific one that has an interest in this type of work, or then you can reach out to them directly. But something to note, something I didn't really understand until I started teaching at a university is that we are never at our computers. So we are always with students or in the classroom. It's very hard to get a hold of faculty. So if you are cold emailing or cold calling, and I would suggest emailing over calling, plan to follow up, just because we're just rarely sitting at our desk responding to emails, and we have a lot of student issues. Associated students, also your universities will have associated students, and they may have volunteer programs. And be persistent and start early, and I'll talk more about that in a couple of slides. Okay, go ahead, next slide. I wanted to give you a picture of what it looks for us in Butte County. So we have, this is where I'm based, we have Chico State up here, CSU Chico. You don't need to click on the links here just because it took a long time for that to come up, and I know we're short of time. But we have our civic engagement, our Office of Civic Engagement, which is a university-wide center based in our College of Undergraduate Education. So if you remember that list of CSU people that I showed you, our Civic Engagement Director is on there. We have an Associated Students organization called CAVE, which has a lot of volunteers at places in the community. And we also have several departments that are actively engaged in active transportation and other types of work. It's the Health and Community Services, where I am, our Communications Department, and Geography and Planning does this type of work. And then on our community college side, we have a campus and community engagement office there, so that's a starting point for our Butte College office. And they also offer a one-unit course for volunteerism. So there are ways that they try and get students in the community and support them, and they do that through giving them units. So next slide. Okay, so just kind of to wrap up, really important, this is where I see a lot of partnerships fall on, from my, or what I've seen, is that people don't start planning early enough. I get phone calls all the time saying, I need a group of students for next Wednesday, and or even next month, and there's no way we can do that. We have to have the activity on our syllabus for our students. Internships happen, they place a year to 6 months in advance. So start your planning early. Universities and community colleges have specific risk management protocols that need to be followed, and those can take time. If it's a class, again, the activity must be on the course syllabus at the start of the semester. If it's a campus volunteer program, they have to have it on. So for fall semester projects, if you're thinking of Walk to School Day in October, you need to be planning way ahead and thinking like March, April. So before I create my syllabus for the fall, I need to have this partnership locked down. And the spring projects, you know, like around October. And internships, you may want to start earlier, but it really depends on the location. And summer, no one's around. So plan on, you know, June through August, not being able to reach anyone really. So hopefully that's helpful in knowing, like, giving people some time and energy to think through how soon do I want to start reaching out, what departments would I want to reach out to, and that type of thing. I think I have one last slide. Next slide. Yeah, that's it. And so thank you very much for your time. And this is an awesome group of my amazing students doing some service learning. So.
All right, Patty, that was absolutely great. Real roadmap for how to partner with universities to access students and garner that support for mutual benefit. So really appreciate your presentation today. I am looking at our time. We are at about 3:17, so we're going to move very briskly into our question and answer period. Which is going to be slightly shortened so that we can also have time for a few announcements at the end of our presentation. Happy to say that we have a few questions that have been coming in through the chat feature as we have been hearing from our speakers. And I'm going to start with Edgar Areño's question that came in actually during Rosario's presentation, but I think it actually has relevance for all of our speakers. So the question is, what requirements need to be met to be able to provide volunteer community service hours as a method of attracting volunteers? And clearly, Patty's presentation covered that a lot for the university students, but if there's a little bit more that you'd like to add, Patty, that would be great. And then Rosario, you can speak to about your experience as well. So either one of you wants to jump.
So this is Patty. So what methods do you use? Can you repeat that again?
What requirements need to be met to be able to provide community service hours as a method of attracting volunteers?
I think that's going to be different for high school and for college, and I think it's going to be specific to which department, for the university at least, which department you're working for. But you brought up a really good point there that I didn't touch on, and that is that some majors actually have required community service hours. Our School of Education requires a certain number of hours, our School of Nursing, and I'm sure some other ones do. So that is another avenue to ask for. But the requirements for us are going to be department specific, and I don't have those for you.
That's okay. That's good to know that there's that little bit of, I guess, nuance between different departments. That's helpful. Rosario, did you want to talk maybe about, because you mentioned some high school students?
We don't have requirements for community service hours. Someone wants to do community service hours here. So we just do like an interview. We discuss their availability, and we talk about the project. And we have another way we do it for internships. The majority of college students that want to do volunteer hours or internships with this campaign, they have to go through our process that we have as agency-wide. So they have to go to our website, and then our volunteer coordinator will contact them. And after that, there's going to be an interview or meeting with me to talk about the campaign and also the activities and the calendar and times. We have requirements because we also offer community service hours for youth in probation. So they can join our campaign, but for them, we invite the parents as well to be part of it, our campaigns. And also, they have to be part of our emotional wellness department activities. So just to give a holistic approach, mainly for youth that want to do volunteer hours as part of this campaign that are in probation. Yeah, that's the only one. And the families have to be part of the wellness program activities.
All right. Hannah, do you have something you'd like to share with regard to Edgar's question? What requirements need to be met to be able to provide volunteer community service hours as a method of attracting volunteers?
Yeah, I haven't heard of much of that in the Safe Routes to School world, although certainly there's examples of using like Boy Scout troops to do improvements on trails on schools and some of those kinds of things. But I mean, the one thing particularly with families around like documenting attendance and trying to provide some sort of reward is that there's also a lot of concerns about not requiring like fingerprinting and having people sign up and things like that, that I feel like we're more often dealing with trying to not document people rather than giving them the reward for that, I'd say.
All right. Well, hopefully, Edgar, that helped answer your questions. Let's see. We have a question from earlier on in the webinar about volunteer burnout. How do you avoid burnout from volunteers who are already stretched thin due to other school-related responsibilities? Hannah, do you want to kick us off with that, with your thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is really hard, I think, in every way of doing things. But having more people who are involved so that there's not too much burden on any single person, and also, you know, really building a culture where it is the fun thing to be doing and like just what they're planning on doing after school, rather than feeling like an onerous task. For example, like if a parent is volunteering for the walking school bus, well, maybe they were already walking to school with their kids, and so that's not going to be a huge demand on them to watch a couple more kids on the way to school.
Very good. Rosario, do you have any some input or insight about avoiding volunteer burnout or keeping them sustained? No, you had.
We have had in the past people that feel that they have a lot on their plate. So what we do is normally we do check-ins with them. We have constant communication, especially with the youth. Some of them, they have a lot of activities. And what I meet with them and we have check-ins, and also with the adults. And for the activities, if they don't come to a series of activities or a specific number of activities, if they meet like a couple, I call them and we have a conversation about what's going on, and then we address that. But we have to do like regularly check-ins with them. Yeah.
Yeah, and that probably helps. And then Patty, I'll just throw that question to you a little bit, but change it up and just ask, you know, how do universities support that? I'm sure that we've, you know, with young students, if they're volunteering on an ongoing basis, is there a process or method of faculty or supporting students in
I mean,
learning?
These are, you know, I think the situation is a little bit different for us. You know, if they're working with a class, it's part of their class, and burnout's not really an option. If it's an internship for units, it's, you know, they're not here, they're not going to a school and getting asked to do 25 things. Like, this is what they're doing. So they may not be a long-term part of the school culture, you know, but they, you know, they're not there long-term getting asked to do a bunch of steps. So I don't think burnout's as much as an issue, if that makes sense.
Right. And maybe for that reason they might be ideal partners to, you know, or as volunteers to expand the work and the reach of non-infrastructure efforts, whatever they might be, whether it's, you know, direct education in the classroom or supporting those the encouragement events or doing additional data collection. I think I think that's the focus. We wanted to feature the university students as a resource because we really felt like that hadn't been discussed in the conversations we've been having in terms of potential for support. So I think you're right. Thanks for kind of elaborating on that. All right. Are we seeing more questions coming in from the field? Okay. All right, well then I think that'll actually allow me then to wrap it up. We've got a couple more slides to close off, or is there one more question? Okay. You know what we're going to do? I think we're going to, in the interest of time, since we have about 4 minutes and I do have some announcements I need to get through, we're going to hold off with the last question, but we're going to make sure that we send that over to our panelists and Esther, make sure that question is answered for you. So Jane, next slide. All right, those are the questions. Again, I wanted to thank our presenters and move forward. As part of our webinar series, we always gather feedback, as your feedback on these trainings are important. Please be on the lookout for a survey that we're sending out to all registrants and participants. All participants on this webinar. That is, we're planning for that to go out tomorrow. And it includes questions regarding your interest in additional assistance in terms of what topics you might like to see as part of the HERC webinar series. Next slide. I wanted to make an announcement that our next Active Transportation Resource Center teleconference is going to be on September 12th. And this is going to be a really great teleconference entitled How Metropolitan Planning Organizations Are Supporting Active Transportation Education, Encouragement, and Enforcement Efforts in California. This is a part 2 of a series, which is looking a little more closely at what's happening in some of the smaller MPOs or rural communities. And that's going to be at 10:30 in the morning on the 12th, and advanced RSVP is required. So there's our group email is atsp@cdph.ca.gov. So please send an email to that if you'd like to participate. We encourage you to do so. Next slide. And then finally, I wanted to thank again our speakers. I thought that their presentations were very informative. We touched upon a lot in terms of who can be accessed for volunteers, how to engage them, and just ways to think about this as a source of support to expand the reach of your efforts, and to also create some mutually beneficial learning situations and community and civic engagement opportunities for community residents, parents, and students. This is their contact information. It's also going to go out as part of our follow-up email. And next slide. And then lastly, as always, your ATRC non-infrastructure regional technical assistance coordinators are available for follow-up questions and comments. On behalf of Mary and Jane, I want to say please, we're available here here in Sacramento for any of the questions. So please don't feel shy in reaching out to us. Okay, and last slide. Big thank you to everyone. We are at 3:30 according to our watch. And again, I hope this was helpful for everyone in the field, and thank you for participating. Appreciate it, everyone. Thank you, speakers.